Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Joomla Sites conference for 2020. And I'm delighted to start with one of the very best presentations we're going to have throughout the whole conference. I don't think Nick needs much in a way of an introduction. So Nick, I'll allow you to introduce yourself. I'll just say that we've been using your extensions for 15 years now. And I think this topic that you're going to present hits at almost the perfect time. I saw this week that GitHub have announced their own dark mode. And
finally,
and I think maybe Chrome is following too. This is one of those really happy matches of the presenter and the time. And so, Nick, welcome.
Hello, and I'm very happy to be here. My name is Nicholas. You don't have to try and pronounce my last name because it's really difficult, so I'm going to do it for you. It's Dionysopoulos. I'm Greek. I'm a geek. I'm not a front-end developer, even though this is how I started my career in web development. I am normally a backend developer, but sometimes I end up doing some front-end stuff. And one of those things that I've done a lot of the past year is dark mode, which is why I'm here to talk about it. And in this photo, I'm pretty much dressed like an off-brand Indiana Jones. And there is totally a reason for doing that, because we're going on a safari down memory lane to talk about retro computing and photophobia. So my first computer, I bought it in 1991. It was this amazing turd, an Amstrad CPC 6128 Plus, an 8-bit computer that was as horrible as its name. It was basically made of parts that had kind of failed to market at the time. Its interface looked a bit like that. Those of you that are old enough can recognize this as CPM. It was a precursor to DOS. Very soon, I switched to PCs. So the interface looked like that. That's what you would get when you launched DOS, the disk operating system. Everything was nice, dark, with muted text, because that's all you could get on the CRT monitors at the time without burning them in. And around 94, something happened. And what happened is that suddenly computers started looking a bit like this. A lot of white. Windows, Excel, Word, the program manager, everything was suddenly screaming in your face. In a few years later, we got Windows 95, Windows 98, the introduction of the web, and the web continued the same visual trend like Windows and everything else. Everything had a very bright background, popping colors. Everything was like you were in an acid trip. There was just so much light. My eyes burned. And I only have very mild photophobia. So let's talk a little bit about dark mode and accessibility, because, photophobia is something that causes me a headache when there is too much light. This is the light mode of a website. What we saw, there is a bright background, there are lots of colors, black text. It's as if you had, a printed page that suddenly appeared on your screen. There is also a different way to present that information, which is the dark mode. It's not exactly inverted colors. It may look at first inverted, but it's really not, because if you look at the sidebar, you still have the same colors. It's just a more contracted palette. There are not so many of them. The background is nice and dark, and the text is not actually white. It's a bit off-white. It is a bit more muted, a bit more calm, much darker, dark mode, right? So let's see what its mode is good for. The light mode, what we're used to seeing in the web, is good for having lots and lots and lots of text as if it was printed on a piece of paper. This is the design paradigm that was copied in the computer. Conveying a lot of context via color. So you know that when you see something red, it's probably an error, something yellow is probably a warning, something blue is informational. And if you see it in 1, 2, 10, 100, a million sites, you know, it's just a convention that's used universally. It's also very good for reflective or transflective displays, with a point which requires a little bit of explanation. So there are different kinds of displays. In some watches and some old mobile phones, you would have a display that doesn't have a backlight. It just has basically a mirrored surface. That's a reflective display. In some cases, you have a backlight and a reflective layer at the back. That's a transflective display, which is a bit popular with Android watches. So those displays, if you try to show something that's black, it actually appears as a mirror. So you need a lot of light color. Light mode is also very good for bright rooms when you're outside, or there are overhead fluorescent lights that burn like 1,000 suns, you know, like most offices. It's also great for people who suffer from glaucoma, because if you try to show them bright text on dark background, they see a halo around the text and they cannot read it. People who suffer from dyslexia, because apparently showing dark text on a bright background helps them comprehend the text better. And people who have protanopia or deuteranopia, which is a form, these are two forms of red and green color blindness. Because of the way their eye perceives those colors, if you show them against a gray background, they kind of blend into the background and there is zero contrast. They cannot see those colors. You basically create something between hard to read text and invisible text. So this is a very good thing to keep in mind, even when you're not working in dark mode, even if when you're working in light mode. Don't mix grays with red and greens, because for some people that will be impossible to easily see. Dark mode, on the other hand, is great, phenomenal when you have photos or standout text, because it just makes that content pop. It is also good if you're aiming for a reduced color set. You can still convey information with color, just not with a very big color palette. So you need to be very economical in your use of color. It's great for transmissive displays, which is basically all the displays that we have in computers, on our phones, everything that's backlit, or the old CRT displays. These are the displays that emit light. It is very good for dimly lit rooms, you know, when you're indoors or when you're outside and it's dark and you're not in the city where the night is almost as bright as the day. And it's great for people who have photophobia. Photophobia means that you basically get an immediate massive headache. You cannot keep your eyes open when you're exposed to a lot of light. If you have eye floaters is something that happens to all of us over time. There are proteins that end up on the inside of our eyes. They sit between the outside of the eye and the optical nerve, so they're always in our field of vision, no matter how we move our eyes. These appear and are very annoying when you're exposed to a lot of light. So when you're looking at a bright sky, when you're looking at a bright screen, you see something in your field of vision that follows your gaze, and it's very distracting. It's like you are perpetually wearing dirty glasses. When you reduce the light, the effect of the floaters is not as pronounced. And it's also great when you have monitors with dead pixels, which sounds like a joke, but it's not, because dead pixels are visible in bright backgrounds. So neither of these modes, neither light mode or dark mode, is accessible in its own right. It's not like one mode is the right thing to do and the other is wrong. You need both of them. And there is an excellent quote that I want to share with you from Daniel Eden, the design manager supporting Facebook's commerce products, who said in one of his recent articles last month that the reality is designing for accessibility means designing for all your users, regardless of the ways in which they need to access your product. So this makes us think that if neither light mode nor dark mode is the ideal mode in its own right, then we need to offer both of them on our sites for our site to be accessible. You see, accessibility is not just area tags. It's the whole concept of how every user will perceive our site. We need to allow them to experience our site in a way that suits them. Now, let's talk a little bit about how modern computers, implement dark mode in various situations. This is the default macOS Big Sur desktop in light mode. And what happens is that I can either manually or automatically set it to dark mode, and it starts looking like that. This can even happen automatically when the sun goes down, or I can install a third-party application where I can tell it when to turn to dark mode, because my office is actually getting very dark about half an hour before the sun goes down. There is something that you might have spotted, which is that the browser also changed to dark mode too. And the site that displays in there also changed to dark mode too, which means that we can kind of hook on the operating system's ability to change its appearance, to magically change the appearance of our sites. So most browsers use the operating system color scheme. Most modern browsers do in most operating systems. And we'll circle back to that later. There are 2.5 ways to support dark mode on our site. One is ignore what the browser does, ignore the operating system, let the user decide. This requires a little bit of JavaScript on our page and a user interface element to toggle between light mode and dark mode. The benefit of this approach is that it will also work on older browsers and operating systems, and any combination of browser and operating system that doesn't quite support dark mode. So like if you're using Kubuntu with Firefox, Firefox will be oblivious that Kubuntu changed to dark mode, for example. So there is a way to support that with that. However, the browser is not aware that we are displaying a site in dark mode and does not customize its built-in browser controls like drop-downs, checkboxes, edit boxes, etc. So we will have to override that with CSS. It does not allow us to do media queries to swap the images to something that's more apt for dark mode. And also, this approach doesn't work at all with email because you do not have JavaScript in email, of course. The approach that I propose, and I think is the most user-friendly one, is let the browser decide. There is no JavaScript, there is no user interface element. It just works. When the operating system or just the browser is set to dark mode, your site displays in dark mode. However, it works on newer versions of the browsers, the support for dark mode. And if you're relying on the browser following the operating system's display mode, it will only work with modern OSs. It will basically work with macOS High Sierra or later, Windows 10, and pretty recent versions of Linux released after 2019, basically. The good thing is that the browser knows to change even its built-in controls to dark mode, like all the text boxes, all the checkboxes, drop-downs, its scroll bars, everything automatically changes to dark mode. You do not have to override or display with CSS if you don't want to. We can do a media query to swap the images and use something that's more apt for dark mode. For example, think that if you have a logo, the site logo on your page. Maybe the site logo is by default is something like black on a transparent background. If you try to use that in dark mode, it will be black on dark gray. It doesn't look good at all. So you need to swap it to something that's probably color inverted or something like that. And this method also works with email, which means that you learn how to do one thing and you can reuse this knowledge beyond just the web. There is a third method. Actually, I call it a half method, hence 2.5 ways, which is a hybrid of the other two. Let the browser decide and the user override. This requires a bit more complex JavaScript because you don't just have to take into account the state of the UI element. You need to determine what will be the default state of the UI element. It's not hard-coded light or hard-coded dark. You need to read the user preference using JavaScript, which makes it a bit more complicated. And no matter how you actually implement it, it will be confusing to the user, and they will think that it's buggy. Because let's say that you had visited this site in the morning, it was light mode, and the light mode was auto-detected and now is saved in a cookie. You visited at night, it's still in light mode. And you're like, but it's night, my browser is in dark mode, why don't you automatically change? And then if you say, okay, then I'm just going to follow the browser, there will be another user who will say, but I wanted to always see your site in light mode, and now I visited at night and it automatically turned dark. Why don't you do what I say? So there is no sensible way to implement this without appearing buggy to exactly half of your users. It's one of those features. So I say it's better to stick to one of the other options. And let's see how we can implement each one of these modes. The first option that I told you, let the user decide, that uses some JavaScript. You just need a very basic JavaScript code in your template. If a toggle button is clicked, then just add or remove a class called, let's say, dark mode, and your CSS just address this class to do your color customization. It's pretty much straightforward, right? It's very simple. The downside is that your CSS that you're loading all the time needs to have both light and dark mode. The visitor to your site, their browser, needs to support JavaScript, which I know you're thinking it's 2020, Nico. I mean, come on. Don't all browsers support JavaScript? Yeah, but many users disable it or use an extension like NoScript that disables JavaScript. And most of these users come from Germany for whatever reason. That's my experience. So let's go to the other option, the preferred option. Let the browser decide everything. This is the option that requires zero JavaScript on your part. In your regular CSS file, you just need to put this root color scheme light dark. This tells the browser that the CSS file that we have right here supports both light mode and dark mode. And then inside your CSS, you just do a media query. Media prefers color scheme dark, and you put your color customizations there. So this magic thing, prefers color scheme, is one of the features introduced in your browsers. It was proposed by Apple and became a W3C standard. The two values that you can target is either dark or light, dark mode or light mode. So you could conceivably have a site that is displayed by default in dark mode and does media prefers color scheme light to have the light mode customization as well. So it's up to you, up to your creative direction to decide which way to implement your site. There is an alternative way to do the same thing, to let the browser decide, where instead of loading a really big CSS file that has both the light and dark mode, we can load two different CSS files. So by default, you you load your light mode CSS file, the CSS file that you probably already have for your site. And then inside your template, you need to add a meta tag, color scheme with the value light space dark, which means my site supports both light mode and dark mode. And then in your template, where it loads the CSS, also add another line to load a dark CSS file that has a media attribute screened and prefers color scheme dark. You may recognize this as the same media query that we used in the dark mode CSS in the previous alternative. So this tells the browser, do not load this CSS file unless the content is displayed on a screen and the browser's color scheme is dark. This is a little bit better for your site because it will load faster if most of your users are coming from light mode, which is more likely because most people have their browser follow the OS display mode, light or dark. The OS is set up to follow the sun, so it goes light on sunrise and dark on sunset. And people are more likely to be awake and using their devices in the morning when there is light. So by default, for most users, you're only loading one CSS file, the light mode, and if they come with dark mode, then you also load another file. For this mode, you can also let the browser decide which kind of image to load. You probably already know the picture element, which allows the browser to load alternative images, for example, based on the browser window size, etc. You can also use the same thing to present a different image for light mode and dark mode using the same media query that we saw before that we can use to load a different CSS file. Media screen and prefers color scheme dark. So by default, you load the light image. If the site displays on dark mode, you load the dark image. That's great for swapping logos. Regarding the hybrid mode for supporting light and dark mode on your site, I'm not going to go into detail because it's very complicated JavaScript. It's a bit of a long explanation. I have a link here. By the way, you don't have to jot down frantically any link. I will give you a link to the actual presentation at the end. Here are some pro tips for implementing dark mode that I found the hard way. That is by trying, failing, and trying again. Make the text slightly bigger and increase the line height. This makes it easier to read it on screen. Use an off-black background and an off-white foreground. Don't use full black and full white because that massive contrast difference creates a disorienting effect when you're trying to read text on a screen. As I said before, red and green are notoriously tricky to get right on top of a basically off-black background. You need to experiment a lot, and you may need to use some of the free tools to simulate someone that has red or green color blindness to see if the end result is invisible or hard to read for them. Do be very careful of your color contrast. It's very easy to end up with a site that has a very low contrast and it's very difficult for people to read. I believe the WCAG guideline for color contrast is around 4. I would say that something around 3.5 in dark mode is actually usable, but you may have to experiment with a hues a little bit. A green that looks pretty okay to you might not provide enough color contrast on the background, so you may have to make it a little bit lighter or add a little bit blue in there. Anyway, there are several tools that you can find for color contrast. And do test the end result in different ambient lighting conditions. What looks great when you're designing it in a brightly lit room may not look that great in a dark room or vice versa. So you may actually need to try different lighting conditions in your office as you're developing dark mode to make sure that what you're creating is usable in all conditions. Because yes, there are people who are going to be using dark mode when there is a lot of ambient lighting. I have found that the easiest way to test dark mode is either with Safari or Microsoft Edge, because both of these browsers, in their developer tools, they have a toggle switch for dark mode. Now, the strategy to implement that to your template is pick one of those methods and stick with it. I prefer the browser decides method. Do not try to mix and match. It will not work. If you cannot modify the template itself, for example, you're using a ready-made template, well, you can use the template's custom CSS file. I recommend building your own template whenever possible, or customizing the template itself. It's far less headache. Always use SCSS, less, or something similar. Don't go commando with CSS. Don't start editing CSS files. I've seen that so many times. I've done that so many times. It's the path to madness. Use proper version control, Git or SVN, and commit often. Do not end up with a million folders, which is template dark 1, template dark final, template dark final, template dark final. You know the idea. Version control will save you a lot of time, especially when you need to backtrack a little bit and figure out why something, what exactly you did that makes things not appear very bright on your screen right now. Always check which extensions on your Joomla site already support dark mode. I can tell you that all Akiba extensions have been supporting dark mode for over a year now. It's in the options. You may need to change the toggle switch there to enable dark mode for the front end, so you don't have to redo all the work. And when you start working on your site's dark mode, start working from the overall page structure and start going into each area of the page and each area of your site next. So start from the generics and then start doing the details. It's very easy to say, oh, I'm going to start and do the entire homepage in one go, which sounds good until you realize that it's just a waste of time, and then you need to start over when you go to the next page. And the final thing you should change on your site when you implement dark mode is images, which find out which images need to have a different dark mode counterpart, and your site's emails. Speaking of which, let's talk about email, the final frontier to dark mode. Dark mode support in email is a bit like the Twilight Zone. So I'll just go through this a little fast. Apple Mail and Mozilla Thunderbird offer the best support. If your computer is in dark mode and the email supports dark mode, they show dark mode, perfect. Windows Mail partially supports dark mode since about 6 months ago when they had the 2004 update. And I say partially supports dark mode because it has a toggle switch for light mode and dark mode. Sometimes you press dark mode and shows you the light mode. You press light mode and shows you the dark mode, which somehow makes sense for them. I don't know. Microsoft Outlook on Windows 10 has a toggle switch for dark mode that actually works, which is insane considering that Microsoft Outlook and Windows Mail are built by the same company. You would think that there would be some like common code there, right? No. However, Microsoft Outlook on iOS and Android does not support dark mode at all, like it was made from yet another different company. Outlook on the web, what's formerly called Hotmail, has full support. You don't have to do anything. It follows the browser. It's amazing. So you have 4 Microsoft products that work completely differently, like they were made by completely different companies with completely different ideas on dark mode. Yeah. Gmail. So Gmail on newer Androids, like Android 10, has full support for dark mode. On the web and iOS, no, it doesn't even know that there is such a thing as dark mode. Again, same company, Google, 3 different products, 3 different ways to interact with it. Insane. Everything else, well, good luck. They don't really support dark mode as far as I can tell. My wife is using a different email client every week, or so it seems. She has tried every kind of hipster email client. Every time I look at her email, there is no dark mode. So what you should really target is Apple Mail, Mozilla Thunderbird, and Microsoft Outlook on the web or Windows 10. The minimal dark mode email is this. It's very easy. The email itself is like an HTML document, right? So in its head, you need to add the meta color scheme light dark to tell the mail client that we do support dark mode. And you also need to add the supported color schemes light dark because this is used by other mail clients. So basically these two headers tell mail clients that this email can be displayed in both light mode and dark mode. The next bit, you will see that there inside the body, there is a style tag, which probably makes you scream. It's really bad HTML. It's really good email. For some reason, some email clients expect the style to be inside the body and not inside the head. Oh, well. So it's just like any other site. You can have your light mode style by default, then do the media prefers color scheme dark media query to have a conditional dark mode, which is pretty much the same as what I told you that you would do on the site itself. That's why I told you that you learn how to do it once and then you can reuse it with email. When you're doing dark mode in email, if you're trying to send email manually, plain text email or plain HTML without images works best because the mail clients which do support dark mode will figure it out and automatically show it in dark mode without you having to do anything. And this is important because when you're sending an email manually, you cannot really edit the HTML of the email itself. So don't use any images. If there are any images whatsoever, all mail clients will just default to light mode because reasons. If you're constructing your own HTML email, as I said, you need to put a style inside the body. It's bad HTML, it's good email, because many mail clients, especially the web mail clients, will just strip the entire head. Images. While you can have light mode and dark mode images on web pages, this is not the case in email. Only Apple Mail and Thunderbird allow you to do a media query for images. Everything else will just show the default image, the light mode image. So you may need to take that into account when you're constructing your email. Make sure that you won't end up with images that are something dark with transparent background that will end up on top of something dark and then disappear. You need to test with your real email clients and email content. Don't just rely on your wits. The way your brain parses the email and the way the mail client parses it, it will be different. I can guarantee this. If you just test the HTML of your email in a browser, what you will get when you actually view it in a mail client might be entirely different yet again. So whenever I'm developing dark mode emails, I have like 3 computers and 3 or 4 mail clients on each one and test. And there are services that can do that, but I'm just a cheap bastard, I guess. There's more information about how you can implement dark mode in emails in this link that you will be able to follow once I give you the link to the actual presentation PDF. So this is how you do dark mode, but is there an easier way that doesn't involve spending a lot of time? The answer is that yes, there is. For the Joomla 3 and Joomla 4 administrator, there are ready-made solutions. There is a plugin that I have made, which is called Dark Magic, which basically conditionally applies the dark mode CSS on the default Joomla 3 and Joomla 4 backend templates. There is, for Joomla 4, there is a a backend template that has a very beautiful dark mode, and it's only dark mode. It's called Betum. It's made by Charlie Lauder. For the Joomla 4 frontend template, by the way, I don't have anything for the Joomla 3 frontend template. For Joomla 4 frontend template, again, Charlie Lauder has made a template called Lightning. Lightning follows the 2.5 method of supporting dark mode, which is it lets the browser decide and the user override. The default state, however, is let the browser decide. So unless the user specifically selects dark mode or light mode, it will just follow the browser. So this is the most sane method that you can follow if you want to implement dark mode in JavaScript to allow the user to override it. For Joomla 3 email templating, so you can have your site's templates be sent in a way that's compatible with dark mode, I have made a small plugin called Mail Magic, which basically lets you create an HTML file inside of which the plain text Joomla emails will be wrapped. Mail Magic allows you to create the HTML template for all your Joomla emails. For Joomla 4, you don't need a plugin like that because Joomla 4 has this feature built in. If you need some more in-depth information about dark mode, back in May, I wrote a lengthy article called Dark Mode is the New Black. It's the article that you saw in all the screen grabs I showed in this presentation. It tells you everything I discussed here and has pretty much the same links plus some extra links about accessibility in dark mode that gets a bit more in depth that I could do in a short presentation like this. So let's sum it up. Welcome to Dark Side, guys. Offering both light and dark mode is accessibility. One or the other is not. Modern browsers allow automatic switching between light and dark mode. Remember, when you're implementing dark mode, to change colors, images, contrast, and size. Your emails also need to be compatible with dark mode. There are off-the-shelf tools for Joomla 3 and 4 to implement dark mode if you don't want to spend a lot of time or if you just want to get acquainted with dark mode on Joomla. And now it is the time where I can answer your questions. And you should be able to see me too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. Yeah, we do have a question from David. Is Twilight connected with progressive web apps?
No, it was just an expression I used. Welcome to the Twilight Zone. I guess I'm just showing my age here. It was a thing when I was a kid. It was a show. A show about things that go really, really strange. But speaking of progressive web applications are just web pages, websites. So everything I said about dark mode in websites here, they also apply to progressive web applications. So there you have it.
A question from Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So you recommend with email testing to work with the real email clients. What happens if you don't have them all? Are there any tools that you can use to test multiple inboxes?
Yes, there are. I know of a tool called Litmus. I actually linked to their blog when I was talking about how to best implement dark mode in emails. I'm pretty sure there are many other tools. This is just the one that I'm familiar with. So just like you have browser stack to test the same site on different browsers, there are excuse me, there are tools to test the email with different email clients.
Okay, and then the final question from me, unless we have any more from the audience, does this actually impact the way you think about the, I'm going to say this in air quotes, the regular design of your site? Do you have to, you mentioned the logo, perhaps you have to think about if your logo has black, how does that appear on a black background? Does this actually start to impact the way you do your first quote unquote regular design of your site?
Yes, it does. I mean, gone are the days where you would take a Photoshop file and cut it into images and implement it as HTML tables. When we're thinking about the design of a site nowadays, we're thinking about many things. We're thinking about responsive web design, so everything on the screen will change position. Some things will be hidden, some things won't be hidden. We're thinking about accessibility in the traditional context, like some things will need to be spoken out loud to users who have a visual impairment that doesn't let them see the content of our site, or the size will need to be able to change for people who have a visual disability that's not as severe. They just need the text to be bigger. We have to think about what happens if the colors of our site get inverted because other people have this kind of disability that requires that. And yes, there is also dark mode, which I would say slot into the same accessibility thinking. So when you're going to create a design for a site, you have to approach it from a different perspective. First, you need to approach it from the perspective of how do I best organize my information, and then how do I lay it out on the screen in a way that's appropriate for each user that will be accessing it. So yes, you need to have a lot of abstract thinking if you're trying to get the design of your site quote unquote right. However, it is impossible for us humans to right away get into this kind of abstract thinking and get it all right in our head from the get-go. So what will actually happen is that you will first implement a version of your site template that looks good to you, and then you will start adding stuff, and you will possibly need to backtrack a little bit and change things and optimize it for other presentation modes, for for different screen sizes, for people with different disabilities, for light mode and dark mode. It's never done. The site is never done. You will need to keep working on it. So if you do not have any more questions.
No, all set. Thank you so much, Nicholas.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.